from a galaxy far, far away.
And a bookshelf straight out of the 90s.
From Thrawn to Dantooine
And everything in between. This is Legends Look Back.
All right. I think we're starting, right, Meg? This is great. So we had Jared run all the way across the pond, connected the internet straight to Trevor Davies' laptop, and we are finally streaming. So unfortunately, our buddy Jared is going to be out this week, so it's going to be me, it's going to be Jared, it's going to be Meg. We're going to have a good time. But yeah, so we apologize. It's a little late, but it's going to be fun, right, Meg?
We really are gonna have fun. It's gonna be great. It's already great. Hello,
it's
everyone.
all good.
And Meg, I want to start off with something, but you know what? Let's just get this show going, shall we? Hello, everyone, and welcome to Legends Look Back, a show brought to you by Utini, the show to listen to. Ah, man. While you're downloading your completely legitimate copy of Brink on LimeWire. And we're here, all things Legends, celebrating our rich EU history as well as diving into lesser-known Star Wars classics. I'm your host, Freddy C, and today I'm joined by the one, the only, Trevor Davey.
How we doing, guys? It is 3 a.m. in the UK.
That is, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know Jared's out. He was unfortunately on the slopes with our boy Johnny Tsunami, and he's sitting this one out. But, it is what it is, and the show must go on. But he is here in spirit.
Yeah, get well soon, Jared.
Yeah, get well, buddy. Trevor, thanks for coming on. Such late notice. It was
no worries.
A kind of an emergency to get everyone here, but here we are, and I cannot wait to talk with you and actually get the listeners to hear a little bit about you and who you are.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so before we do that, Meg, how are you doing?
Everything is fine. I'm good, guys. I'm good. Hello, everyone. I'm going to switch off of me quickly because technology, guys, is so fun. It's so fun. I love it. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for coming. Please enjoy the show.
Yeah. So first of all, Meg, I wanted to mention this to everybody because I think it's amazing. So you've got a blurb on Into the Dark, don't you?
I do. This was a total surprise to me. Someone that I used to work with tweeted at me saying that part of a review that I wrote for, I believe, Master and Apprentice, praising Claudia Gray had ended up on the back of a Star Wars book. That's
so awesome.
It is really cool. And it's just, I don't know what else to say about it because I'm still processing, but, it's a good reminder that if you're doing some work and it doesn't feel like it's ever going to result in anything, 2 years later, you could just be sitting in your office and get a tweet that your words are on a Star Wars book. So you know what? Keep at it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It also shows that good things happen to good people.
Yes.
Sure.
That's right, everybody. Meg is on a Star Wars book. All right, cool. So that is so awesome, Meg. Honestly, that's I would love to get my name or at least a review on a book. So you are. I'm so glad you're producing this show for us. Someone like you, it's really special. And the name of this episode I've dubbed the Trevor Trove because you hear that sigh, but Trevor is one of the most brilliant guys I know when it comes to Star Wars and the expanded universe, really. So what better way to introduce you guys to Trevor, to get to know him a little bit and what's going on in that brain of his. So
you're gonna make me blush.
Buddy, I'd love for everybody to get to listen to you. You're so interesting, and all the things that you know, all the obscurities and stories that nobody's really ever listened to. So let's just get started, man, and let's just jump right into it. So first of all, Trevor, I have the obvious question. when did you first get infected by the Star Wars?
Honestly, I can't ever remember a time when I wasn't a massive fan. So I was born in '76, but some of my earliest memories aren't even of the movies. They're of having the toys and having the bedspreads and curtains, and I even had Star Wars wallpaper and toothbrushes and sticker albums. It was everything. It was everywhere in my house. I don't think I can really remember seeing the films till I was about 7 or 8, and they would have been dodgy bootleg copies because they didn't come on TV.
Yeah.
So it's never not been there.
So it's always been a part of your life then. Everything you've ever knew about Star Wars was just ingrained in your blood from the very beginning.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I remember studying the back of the card back on the figures to see characters' names and who I still needed to collect and everything. It's just always been there.
That's pretty cool, man. So there's a bathroom in Rancho Obi-Wan, and Steve
Right.
Sansweet. Yeah, he's got the whole bathroom is all toiletries. You've got shower curtains, old things that you haven't seen in so long. There's I think it's like a battle droid soap dispenser. It's crazy, man. It reminds me of my college years.
Well, I think if you
But,
check out my profile picture on Twitter and in our Slack, it's of me holding the old Rancor figure, but you can see the wallpaper and the curtains and everything in the background. And I must be 8 or 9 in that picture.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I see Joxy in the chat, and he's talking about a show. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your show?
Yes, so me and Jose do a show, it's a Patreon exclusive show from another Utini show, the Star Wars Archives. It's a really interesting one because obviously I'm a massive fan of the EU and I love it and I love the obscurities. Jose, he's not new to Star Wars, but he's not as well read. He's read sort of 40 books, so we get to take a really deep dive and you have two interesting viewpoints on it, and it's a really interesting dynamic. We cover loads of topics, and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like the knowledge that you guys have, especially, every time I read a Star Wars book, especially a Legend Star Wars book like True Sepakura, you always have a source book for me to read, which is like, as you move along through the book, you look at this source book and it gives you way more information about what you just read. And
there's so much out there. It doesn't matter what you like, what your favorite book or comic is, who your favorite character is. There's something that you won't have read.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing to me. So let's just start at True Sepakura because honestly, it's one of my favorite books. But just tell me what did you this guide that you created, right? Or not that you created, but all the information that you've seen of this. Where do you find a lot of this information?
I sent you a thing the other day because I know it's your favorite book. So I sent you a document pointing you to a few little, they call them vignettes, anything that's in a source book, but it could just be a paragraph long, it could be a page. But the True Sepakura source book has got all these little vignettes giving background history on the main characters, things that happen off screen between chapters, even paragraphs that are within the novel, but then expanded in the source book with original text sort of either side. And it just really helps flesh it out. And then you tie in things like the galaxy-wide Newsnet broadcast that you get in the old Adventure Journal books from West End Games that sort of give you news headlines of events that led into the events of a book as well. And it just really does. It expands that whole book, and that's the sort of thing about Star Wars that I've always loved.
Yeah, especially the West End Games, they created so many different types of stories that I bet you a majority of even Star Wars fans have no idea exist, and a lot of those stories
most of the
themselves.
planets and aliens and everything that we take for granted comes from West End Games.
Yeah, no, that's true. You're right. So going based off of that, so Jedi Murphy has a question for us in Discord. And what Jedi Murphy's saying is, who is the best character who only makes one appearance? A ton of Legends is long, multi-book stories, so I'd like to hear you discuss some of the weirdos and wacky one-offs. All right, man, that's all you.
So, I think my favorite one-off book is probably Darth Maul Shadowhunter. Obviously, Darth Maul's in it. He's not a one-off. But the whole the whole book is essentially just a chase scene. There's a character called Lorne Pavan who ends up in possession of a holocron that somehow exposes the Nemodians' involvement in certain nefarious dealings, and Sidious sends Maul to get it back, and he just chases him for half a book. And it doesn't end well for anybody, but it's a really great lead into episode 1 as well. And although you never see Lorne Pavan again, you do see his son turn up in the Coruscant Knights trilogy later on down the line. But as far as one-shot character goes, he's probably my favorite.
Well, that's pretty interesting. I never even really thought about that. There's a lot of weirdos in Star Wars, right? And by weirdos, we've got you can think of any alien, right? The Rakata, is that the name? The Rakata?
Yeah.
Let's see, what other weird species that just show up randomly out of nowhere? We've got
Well, I was thinking of one the other day. I don't know if you've read it, Freddy. Crucible, the very last Legends book with the big Hero 3 in it. The sort of big bads of that book are the Kalumai. They're basically these massive head creatures with tiny little bodies and arms and legs who were also super intelligent.
Yeah.
But that novel was written by Troy Denning. It was one of the last Legends novels to come out. He invented that species for a West End Games sourcebook that came out in 1989, and they were never used. They've got this big entry in the sourcebook, and they'd never sort of been picked up. And I think he just wanted to go out with a bang.
That's pretty amazing. So, I mean, I Crucible's on my list of to do. Surprisingly, I'm still stuck on reading Truset Bakura like at least 16 times. But but you know, the amount of characters for those who don't know, I'm pretty sure there's not many people that don't know. But Truset Bakura was one of my first books when I entered the Star Wars EU realm, and it's a story about lizard aliens, right? And it's almost sci-fi meets fantasy, which it leans more heavily on the sci-fi side in my opinion, but it brings in, it was like my first entrance into the weirdos, right? Because they're definitely some strange characters in Star Wars, and that one that you just mentioned, Crucible, I've never even heard of that, and that's my bad.
Really? That was
surprisingly
the last big release. You know, it's the swan song of Luke, Han, and Leia in the EU in Legends.
And you know, I think part of me doesn't want to read it because I feel like if I ever do read that book, it's the end of Legends, and but I have to get to that. So Jared actually left a good question in the chat as well. He's asking, what is the earliest appearance of the Jedi Code? And he said he was surprised to see it in Dark Apprentice, which was from '93. Who came up with it?
Now, I don't know who wrote it specifically. I know that it shows up in Heir to the Empire, the first Thrawn book, but only sort of the first line. Luke says to himself a few times, there is no emotion, there is only peace. And the whole thing itself turns up, again, West End Games, the second edition of the Star Wars sourcebook from '94, which is after Jedi Apprentice. But somewhere in there, somebody obviously sat down and decided to flesh out. Maybe Zahn had wrote that first refrain for Heir to the Empire and it had been fleshed out. I think the code itself had been discussed. But as to who came up with it, I'm not entirely sure.
That's so interesting. It's amazing that West End Games just seems to permeate through Star Wars. And, you know, in my opinion, those who do really love Legends and stick with Legends, kind of like, you know, people like yourself, me and Jared, you know, West End Games has a lot to do with Legends, and they created a lot of content. So, you know, you keep bringing it up in everything we talk about, and I think that itself is something to lend to West End and the amount of content that they've created. So, you know, who is West End? Those who don't know, who is West End?
It's basically a role-playing game that started in the late 80s, so sort of in the dark times. I think the first sourcebook came out in 87, so you're still talking 4 years after Return of the Jedi. But then when the book started coming out with Heir to the Empire, all the authors that were invited to write for, well, Bantam at the time, instead of trying to think up new ships or new planets, they basically already had this whole catalogue of creatures and locations that they could just choose from. And some of the people who went on to write for Bantam and Star Wars had worked for West End Games, so they just kind of took it with them.
Wow, that makes sense, man. That's interesting. So they did have, eventually they did get a license from Lucas, right, to create all that content. And
oh no, it was always
game.
Licensed. Yeah, it was always licensed. Even in the late 80s, nobody thought there'd be any more books or any more movies. So Star Wars was literally 3 movies and a role-playing game. That was the entire existence of Star Wars.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize, but the Dark Times was legitimately, it was a very odd era of Star Wars and George Lucas, right? There was almost no sign of it ever coming back. It just seemed like it was done.
Ewok movies. That was it.
Yeah. The Ewok movies. And those of you who've not seen the Ewok movies, oh man, you're missing out on some. I'm not saying it's the greatest Star Wars that you'll ever see, but it's the most historic you've ever seen. Meg, have you seen the Ewok films at all?
I haven't. I don't know if I should. I'll go off of both of your recommendations. Should. Everybody should. Well, that's what they said about the holiday special, and then I watched it sober, so...
No, nobody should watch that.
So I have to admit, man, this is kind of one of those things that you're just like, oh yeah, Jared, I definitely grew up with the special editions, but I have to be honest, my exposure to Star Wars was the Ewok films. That was...
Really?
Yeah, that was it. And it's so funny because it was in the back of my mind and I never knew that I saw it until I watched it and I was like, oh my goodness, this is what got me into Star Wars.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the special editions. I saw something on Twitter the other day that made me feel incredibly old. That it basically said it was 24 years ago that the special editions were released. And it had been 20 years since the original release of A New Hope at that point.
Yeah.
Or some numbers like that. And I remember going to see the special edition in the cinemas because obviously I was too young to see the originals. But even then, they'd started taking bits from the books, like with Coruscant at the end of Return of the Jedi and bits like that. So they'd already really started using all these other inventions that had just come from the books.
How helpful do you think the special editions were to Legends?
It definitely brought Star Wars back into the mainstream. And again, a lot of the reason for the special editions was to see if there was still interest, but also to kind of see where the technology was at. So George could then make a decision about whether to make the prequels or not. And obviously they made a shit ton of money and it all worked out well.
It's crazy to me that the special editions were the catalyst to getting a whole different era, a generation of kids into Star Wars. I think, honestly, if it wasn't for those special editions, I don't know if I would have kept up my love for Star Wars. I don't know if I would have grabbed those books, to get myself back into the EU. And I have to admit, Legends books themselves, just the EU in itself was enough to keep me involved and consumed with Star Wars between the eras that it was just nothingness, right? It was just the special editions, and then you had Episode 1, and I don't know
the beginning of sort of Legends and the expanded universe as we know it. So you guys were talking about the Glove of Darth Vader series and book on your show a couple of weeks back, and when you think about when that was released, you had the Jedi Prince series being released at kind of the same time as Dark Empire and the Thrawn trilogy, and all three were kind of written in isolation by themselves. There was no unity amongst the expanded universe. You had these three completely different takes on it. It's incredible how it became what it became in the first place.
It's true. It's interesting that, like people like Leland Chi and Pablo Hidalgo, the ones that were just the holocron of Lucas, and them realizing that if we keep this continuity going, right? And for instance, in Jedi Search, the amount of continuity that it mentions in the first few chapters and the events that have happened before is you can really see it in that book. There's no doubt. If you go back a little further, back into like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, it's just the Wild West of Star Wars.
And I think that's what grabbed me as a reader. I used to be a big fan of Stephen King and Terry Pratchett, and even when Stephen King has books in his own universe set in the same time, they don't have that connectivity that, after having read, the first adult novels in the Thrawn trilogy that had ever really come out of Star Wars, and then follow that up with a Jedi Academy trilogy, where they straight away say, this is 2 years after. Those things that you read about definitely happened. This is how they impacted the galaxy at large, and this is what our characters did next. I was hooked.
Yeah, that's amazing. So which one of those early Legends books are your favorite?
Of the early ones,
yeah, we're talking
it's probably going to be the Thrawn trilogy. I mean,
yeah,
it has to be, because it's up there and it still stood the test of time.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, the fact that Zahn created the Thrawn legend, or the Thrawn legacy in canon, was a sure sign that book definitely killed it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still people who say it's their favorite book of all time, even with all these other hundreds of books. So, you can't argue with that.
Yeah, that's pretty true. So we've got actually a pretty good question by one Nia L in the chat here. And so she's saying, what top 3 books would you recommend for women starting Legends? Meg, you can hop in on this one too.
Now, one of my favorites, so years and years ago, I was going out with an Australian girl. I was with her for about sort of 5-6 years, and she'd read the occasional Star Wars book, and she read Tatooine Ghost, and she really connected with that novel. And it's about Leia going back to Tatooine and finding out more about her grandmother. And she thought, as a book, that the story was just incredible and gripping and compelling. So I'd probably recommend that one.
Yeah, Tatooine's Ghost is pretty good. I have a couple of them in the back, so maybe we'll have some sort of little thing for a fan maybe one of these days. We'll have to talk about that. But yeah, what do you think of Courtship of Princess Leia? I think that's a pretty good one too.
It may not have aged well as well as some other books.
Yeah. So
but for anyone
the thing.
Who likes Courtship of Princess Leia, I highly recommend reading Solo Command before it. It may be an X-Wing book, and it may be book 7 of the X-Wing series, but you don't have to have read the others. But it serves as a direct prequel to that book, and the two together make for a really good sort of duology, even though they were written years apart.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of new fans who are hopping into the EU, and I love it. I love when people discover that there are Star Wars books for the first time, and it's like, oh goodness, hold on. First, let me show you this stream. It's called Legends Look Back.
Yeah.
But
the amount of people who've come into our Discord recently, it's just been incredible. So many new people coming in, specifically asking about books.
Yeah, especially asking about books and trying to figure out, where do I start, right? And there's always those questions. Where do I start? And you know what? Sometimes the best thing is just to grab it, just to grab a book and figure out where it's going to take you, right? And the what I like about and the one thing for those who are just coming into Legends, right, is Trevor, you can speak to this, but it is written during a time when cultural sensitivity was not as sensitive.
Yes.
And you've got, like, for instance, the X-Wing Rogue Squadron books, where it's very 90. Imagine Top Gun and Baywatch in the 90s. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, there is a lot of that, but with some incredibly written action sequences.
Completely. And even during the time, the thing that I love about George is he always tried to instill some sort of equality, right? And you can see it in his books. It's almost like the morals and the mythologies of our time, right, are instilled in these books. For instance, you've got, what is it, that planet where Han Solo lands and everyone's a slave, and they're all working for this feeling, for the huts, right?
Elysia.
Yep, Elysia, and and you find, you get people like Charlie on the show, or even Meg. You've read a lot of things with strong women characters, but it's hard to really, you've got to remember when these were written and just accept it for what it is ultimately.
Yes, but I mean the Han Solo trilogy, I think that actually does have a really strong female character in Bria Theron. But as you go through the years of Legends, you've got people like Kiera Holt from a Knight Errant trilogy. You've got Mara Jade in her own right. George Lucas started the movies with a strong female character in Princess Leia, and it's always been a massive part of Star Wars.
Yeah, that's really true. So speaking of females and female characters in Star Wars, who is your, besides Leia, because I feel like it's so obvious if we go with Leia, who is your number one and why?
I'm in the middle of a new Jedi Order read through, which I haven't done in years, and Jaina's really standing out. Jaina Solo, she's obviously so strong, and she's so committed to what she wants to be with regards to her role in Rogue Squadron, whilst not letting it affect her role as a Jedi. And I've just got to the book where, spoiler warnings for 20-year-old books here, where she's temporarily blinded, and the grit and determination that she's written with in that book, it's incredible.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I that's one of my, I'm starting to get more into that series as I dive into Legends again. There was a time when I was reading I don't know if Jared's gonna like me saying this, but I was reading a lot of canon books. I was trying to get a vibe of what this new Star Wars was going to be about, and it is different. There's no doubt about that.
It is different. It's still incredible. I think Legends, now we have more movies than we had when a lot of Legends was written. A lot of it was written before even the prequels. I think it went to some really weird places, as lots of other authors had their own take on what Star Wars could be and should be. But with the prequels coming along, the saga of Anakin Skywalker was obviously solidified, what the nature of the Force is. We had a bit more information about. So I think what we get these days are almost a purer Star Wars story than maybe what we got in Legends, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so we're getting a lot of good communication going on in the chat here. So Razor's Edge, another good Leia focus book. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk about Razor's Edge a bit. That's a pretty interesting era of Star Wars. It's almost like it was almost a transition, I believe.
Yeah, well, it was meant to be a trilogy. So you had Razor's Edge, Honor Among Thieves, and then Heir to the Jedi, which became the first canon book. And you know what? Canon can have that one.
Yeah, Meg, have you read that one yet?
Which one?
Heir to the Jedi.
We're not talking about that book.
Okay. So yeah, it's so that during that time it was really interesting. I was very skeptical about Star Wars and where Star Wars was going to head and what's happening to my Legends. I have to be honest, I'm glad that Legends is still currently Legends. It's got its own kind of vibe, it's totally different. But what do you think Legends would be like if it was written in our current era? How different do you think it would be? And that's a hard question because there's so much. Essentially,
I think you just end up with what we have now. Star Wars books are never written. They're never written just solely by the author. There's a massive team behind them, and you've got people like Pablo Hidalgo saying, well, you can't write about this, or this is the way the overall story's going. So they're always a sort of collaborative effort. So we probably just end up with what we have now.
Yeah, that's what I think is really interesting. So the whole thing with that question especially was, I was asked that, is Legends old? Is it too old for me to read? And I was like, it's Star Wars. I mean, you're gonna have the same experience with this than you have with even a new book, right? It's not like they use in heareth time, It's not. We're not dealing with Shakespeare here, and that's where I'm trying to go. I think it works for anybody, right? I mean,
And it definitely gets weirder. So on our last recording of Star Wars Archives, me and Jose were talking about Batrusa Bakura, and I summed it up very, very briefly by saying it's space dinosaurs and soul-sucking droids, and he was sold just on that sentence alone. He's like, I need to read that book.
That's awesome. That's so cool. So, comics, right? Comics are very important to Star Wars,
Absolutely.
and especially Legends, which I feel like we don't really talk about comics that often. And that might be something we'll tackle later on. But let's go through some comics. We've got your favorite trilogy, right? And now let's go with comics. What would you say your favorite is in the comic realm?
Now, for me, it's anything written by John Ostrander. I know John Jackson Miller, who did the Knights of the Old Republic, which is incredible, and he did a few other bits and pieces as well, but the original sort of Clone Wars Dark Horse series, everything filled in from episode 2 to episode 3, I think are some of the finest Star Wars comics that have ever been written.
Yeah, I would agree with you completely. And the one thing I love about not just those comics, but even John Jackson Miller's comics is the things you want to see in a book, right? They always talk about certain ships in a book. They always talk about planets and aliens, but in comic books you actually get to see it. And honestly, the amount of information that just comes from comics and the visuals and the creations is amazing to me.
Yeah, and some of the original characters that they kind of develop through those arcs as well. Well, especially with Knights of the Old Republic. And then the sort of flip side of that is the other one that really stands out for me is the Dark Times series, set just after episode 3. When, again, they didn't know there was going to be any movies, that they had to deal with post-Order 66 and the Jedi Purge. And again, that's again some of the best Star Wars comics. The art in those is absolutely incredible.
I want to dive more into that. I would say that I haven't really dug too far into that series, but go ahead and tell the audience just a little bit more, because I've been reading about it and it's fairly interesting.
Well, it kind of spun out of the last few episodes of the Republic series as well, and there's 5 arcs, and it's all about a Jedi who kind of really has to go to ground and how he's going to live in this new galaxy, because Order 66 and the Rise of an Empire, it's quite a galaxy-shattering change of scene, and it really deals with that. Plus, you have a load of returning characters from the Clone Wars comics as well, and yeah, it's just really top-notch writing.
Yeah, so Order 66 is definitely one of the... we always wonder why there's only a couple Jedi left in the world, right? And we hear about the Clone Wars and everything, and we actually get to see that come to light, but I just think that the visuals that you see during Order 66, I mean, if you were hurt watching it on the film, I mean, seeing it in a comic book and reading about it is just as bad, but it's such an important it's such an important history in Star Wars. And when was, I mean, the Jedi Purge, when did that really start coming about? When
Do you
did that
mean
become an idea?
The idea of it, or the actual sort of execution? I mean, if you go back to the original A New Hope, they talk about there being no more Jedi left and Vader having killed all of them. And that's actually mentioned in a couple of the really old Marvel comics from the early 80s, when they had nothing to work with at all. And the Return of the Jedi novelization talks about it as well. And it's even in that book from 1983, we find out about Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting on a lava planet and it not going well. So the seeds have always been there. But there's certain things that the authors were never allowed to touch. They weren't really allowed to touch for Clone Wars. They weren't allowed to touch what they didn't know about Order 66. So
yeah, George Lucas didn't want anybody writing about his playground.
Yeah, exactly. He knew, even back then, exactly how the story was going to go, or the broad strokes of it, at least. So until he actually decided to make the prequels, everyone they knew there were no Jedi left. They knew that Darth Vader hunted them down. They didn't really know many more specifics than that.
Yeah, and it was such an interesting thing to, especially as a kid or an adult, however old you were when you dug into these books, to see on screen, the Clone Wars and the Jedis, and seeing all the different things that you just imagined in your head on screen was pretty amazing. But going back to Marvel, Marvel was pretty important at the very beginning by keeping a lot of that fan base active, right? So what were some of the first Marvel comics that I guess really so we've got Splinter of the Mind's Eye, right? In terms of books.
Yeah.
What was it on the Marvel side? Because they were working with Marvel, right?
Yeah, so Marvel released they started with a 6-issue adaptation of A New Hope, and that monthly series ran for 107 issues, that's massive. You know, that's bigger than any Star Wars comic has ever managed. I think Knights of the Old Republic is the longest one at 50 issues. So
Yeah.
they went from 1977, I think they finished in 1984. So they even carried the story on after the events of Return of the Jedi. It got really weird because they didn't know where they were going. And a lot of the Marvel comics are really weird. But there's some in there that I remember reading about as a kid that, you know, really just stuck with me for, you know, even till now.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird. So one of the things we talk about all the time is all of the weirdness with Legends. But Trevor, tell us about some of the weirdest things you've seen in the comics.
Oh God. I mean, they Dark Horse did like an anthology series called Star Wars Tales, but it was lots of little short comic strips. So you'd have 4 or 5 different stories per issue, and these were bumper size issues. These were sort of 64-page issues, and some of the stuff in there it's obviously tongue in cheek. There's one about what's it called? Is it George R. Binks, which is about Jar Jar's dad getting washed up. There's one about Boba Fett doing his own version of Fight Club. But there's also some really, really hard-hitting stories as well. There's Vader fighting a vision of Darth Maul. There's one story that I've always loved, which is called The Secret Tale of Luke's Hand, which is Han telling a fairy tale to young Anakin Solo about what happened to Luke's hand after it was chopped off in Empire Strikes Back, and visiting various locations from the Star Wars saga. And that series really could play with serious and absolute craziness, and it was all the better for it.
The amount of things that you just mentioned there, I can't even begin to list them all off. But the one thing that the one thing I really wanted to hit on was the Boba Fett Fight Club. Can we go into that just a little bit more?
It was just it's a silly little sort of 4-page story. I don't remember much about it. I just know that it exists.
That's awesome. So for all of you guys out there, there's a Boba Fett Fight Club. Just don't talk about it. That's pretty cool, man. That's not even the tip of the iceberg of the amount of weird stuff in Legends. But
that one does a really good job of it could almost be entry level, because it kind of lets you dip your toe in and peek behind a curtain and decide whether you like that. And there's so many authors and styles involved in it as well. When they announced the Star Wars Visions show, the animated show that's going to be on Disney Plus, I really want it to be like those comics, just loads of different random approaches.
Yeah, that's so cool. I just love the weirdness in Legends, and one of the things that was never released, I'm not sure if we're going to get slapped with the NDA after talking about this, but there's the detours and how George Lucas loved parody, right? He loved people parodying his stuff, and he always gave approvals despite anything. Is there any Star Wars parody material that you know of?
There's a couple of official ones that spring to mind. So there's Tag and Bink, who are 2 useless stormtroopers who kind of blunder their way off screen through all the events of the original trilogy. They've had a few comics throughout the years. They were actually filmed for a scene in Solo, but it got cut. So they nearly got recanonized. And then there's another 2-pager from the Republic comic series called the Deveronian version. So there's a Deveronian called Vilmar Grak, who hangs around with Quinlan Vos quite a lot. And it's him telling the sort of story of the previous story arcs, but all completely from his point of view, where he's the hero of the story and the good guy and comes out of it looking amazing, which is the complete opposite of what actually happened.
Yeah, so Bro Dameron in the chat is saying they're still in the comic and novelization. Tag and Bink are canon. That is
there
so
we go.
cool.
I didn't
There
catch
you
that
go,
when I read the
guys.
novelization.
Tag and Bink are right up there with Thrawn.
Yep.
That's cool, man. So that's I like to show a lot of people Tag and Bink because it is funny. The John Jackson Miller comic series has a lot of humor, and that's the thing about Star Wars is there's got to be some level of humor, right? It might be dry.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and you see it in the movies. It's got to be there. What I'm not. This might be out of left field, but what are some of the funniest things that have happened in Legends?
So, for me, the funniest Legends book, and easily in my top 5, if not a top 3 on any given day, is the X-Wing book, Starfighters of Adumar. It's a complete one-shot. It's got X-Wing on the front, but it's just a later on down the timeline book. You don't have to read anything else before it. It's just Wedge, Hobby, and Jansen off on a little adventure by themselves, and it's hysterical. There's
That's
a scene
awesome.
where they have to go undercover on a planet, and they're dressed in like Hawaiian shirts and pretending to be rednecks and having to put on dopey accents. It's just brilliant.
There you go. That is something you never expect to see in Star Wars, but there
Hawaiian
it is. It's in
shirts.
Legends. Hawaiian shirts in Star Wars. If there's nothing you grabbed from this episode, at least you know that Canon needs Hawaiian Star Wars shirts. So let's make sure we get a little petition going for that. What do you say?
Well, they did give Snoke a kimono.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. So speaking of Snoke, we're not going to speak of him, but we're going to go with the Emperor and his clones. I'm sorry, Meg.
This took longer than I thought to come up.
I have no comment.
How vulnerable do you think the Emperor felt when he saw his naked, slimy clones everywhere?
Oh my god.
I mean, I
You don't have
can
to
go
answer
one
that.
better. For anyone who's read the Dark Empire series, but hasn't read the Crimson Empire series, you actually find out that it was one of the Emperor's loyal royal guards who killed all his spare clones to stop him coming back.
Wow.
So he could take control of the Empire, but just didn't do it good enough.
Yeah, it feels like even through the Disney movies, right? We've got a lot of digging into Legends because there's still a lot of good content there, right? And you see it in Mandalorian. I'm not 100% sure if those scout troopers were tagging Bink. They definitely had the vibe.
I saw rumors that they might have been.
Yeah. So what influence has besides Thrawn and besides all of the obvious things, what influence has Legends had in current Star Wars? Let's just go with the screen stuff for the moment.
I mean, the movies are. I'm not sure they could have been more of a detour from what we had in that similar time period in Legends, which to me it's a good thing. You've got two completely kind of polar opposite universes. You can't really, apart from a resurrected Emperor, there's not a lot that you could pick from Legends and say that they used that as a story point because of obviously what happens with Luke and Rey and the lack of solo children.
Yeah.
But I can't knock Luke's journey in the sequel trilogy, just as I can't knock him in the Legends trilogy. I'm sure we would have all loved to see Luke having a academy and being happily married with his own child and having re-established the Jedi Order. But the sequel trilogy also makes sense too.
Yeah, I'd have to say, just looking at I guess the Legends influence, right? We've got what I really like is that we've got Luke entering into the Mandalorian, right? And he's doing something that we've read about in Legends, and which is still untouched. It's still somewhat untouched in canon and in the movies, but it is that Jedi Academy, and we'll talk more in depth of that Jedi Academy on one of our later episodes. But What in terms of starting the Jedi, right? Restarting the Jedi. How? I mean, Luke must have been under some intense pressure. What do you think during
I
that
remember
time? Just trying to start it.
I remember the Jedi Academy trilogy, and he was so desperate to just even find out what a Jedi was, because he was trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi for what, 2 hours, Yoda for 3 days, 6 months, who knows? Depends what book you read. But that's all the training he had. So a lot of Legends was about him just trying to find out, and he could only find out what the authors were allowed to write about.
Yeah.
So you had this weird thing. I know one of the things in the Jedi Academy specifically was these little paddles that they held up against a head that would measure if someone was force sensitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was obviously before midichlorians were written, but you could electronically tell. But yeah, it got weird.
It did get weird. I think the crazy thing about just the Legends authors and Legends itself is you can see through the books they're trying to figure out what these things are as well, and they're going along the journey with Luke. We're all kind of going along that same journey, right? Like if you think about it, you didn't have the Clone Wars, you didn't have all of these Jedi that you had during episode 1 and 2 and 3, of course, but back then it was definitely the Wild West, and everything had to be created. So what kind of Jedi, besides the ones that we read about, right? We've got, of course, Luke and Obi-Wan and Yoda, but what Jedi existed in the Legends era, I guess, that were kind of, hiding and whatnot?
There's a lot of them. There's definitely more than you kind of think. There's one that always jumps out to me because it was one of the first Star Wars books I ever owned as an adult. So earlier on in the show, we spoke about that sort of triple approach of the Jedi Prince series, the Thrawn trilogy, and Dark Empire, all in that sort of 92, 93 era. There was another pair of books that were released in 1994, Choose Your Own Adventure books that were only ever printed in the UK, called The Lost Jedi. And it's about this 18-year-old who loses his parents, realizes he's force sensitive like his father before him, gets involved with the theft of the Death Star plans. Very similar to Luke Skywalker, but just completely different and never mentioned again. But when you look through Legends, there's a lot of Jedi that did kind of survive and turned up again for story purposes.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about, you've got little I guess nuggets, lessons that Luke learns along the way from meeting Force sensitives or people that were mystics, not quite Jedi, more witches if anything. And it's so interesting to see the things that he learns from just these people. And I'm trying to think of the book right now. I'm not sure if it's Dark Times or Dark Empire. I forget, honestly, at the moment. There's so much Legend content out there. It's hard to keep track of. But the Choose Your Own Adventures, I feel like those are really interesting, and I haven't dug too far into those. There's a lot of I think Alexa even has a Choose Your Own Adventure Star Wars thing going on. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, there's a few of them on there.
Yeah, so let's take it back in the day. What kind of adventures did we have? What were these? Who made these adventures, and where did they come from?
I mean, the two I've just talked about, they were published by a company called Box Tree, and like I said, they've never sort of been referenced again. They were just a really random thing when I think there was a while where they just let people write Star Wars and not really thought about any continuity until Heir to the Empire kicked, and they were like, that works. That's what we should go with. But even in that book, we were talking about Luke establishing the Jedi Order, and one of the things he's really looking for when he meets Sebulba is, what does it mean to be a Jedi? They do that thing where they're asked to give judgment on a village dispute, and that's how little they knew about what it meant to be a Jedi.
Yeah, and there's a lot of continuity, not even continuity. There's been a lot of retcons in even some of the source books, right? You've got I'm thinking Lars was who was he? The brother of Obi-Wan of Ben Kenobi?
That was in the original Return of a Jedi novelization.
Yeah, that's right. So right off the bat, you've got retconning going on just in the OT series itself.
Oh
But
yeah.
what were some
By the
what
time
were
you've
some of
had,
the biggest ones?
oof, a lot of the time it was just putting characters in places that they were never designed to be. Man, I can't think of any massive retcons off the top of my head.
Yeah.
What was the thing that was they thought? Oh, here's one. So the Jedi Prince series, when at the end of Book 6, Han and Leia are about to get married, and then the next book that kind of happens chronologically, they're not married, but they will be married by the time the Thrawn trilogy starts, and the authors kind of said, well, Book 7, if we wrote it, the Empire was going to interrupt the wedding and they wouldn't have got married, so then their actual wedding can still exist. So weird things like that have always happened throughout Star Wars literature.
Yeah. I would say the entire Splinter of the Mind's Eye has been retconned.
Yeah. Was that... Does it happen in the book that... Is it Luke or Leia is possessed by the spirit of Obi-Wan Kenobi? Or was that the retcon?
Goodness, I think
I
that
think
might have
that
been the
might
retcon.
be the retcon, yes.
Yeah. Let's see. You've got Luke, who can swim really well, being from a desert planet.
Yeah. But only in that book.
Yeah, only in that book. Only in that book. Leia, who cannot swim for whatever reason. But yeah, it's that was an interesting time in history. So I can't imagine what it would have been like to see Star Wars and then read Splinter of the Mind's Eye.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that they did not go that route.
Absolutely. I'm very, very happy we had Empire Strikes Back instead.
Yeah. Empire Strikes Back is definitely a lot of people's favorites. And I would say, in terms of books, what would you rate? So, first of all, what's your favorite Star Wars movie out of the original?
I'd have to go with A New Hope, just because
A New
it
Hope.
was the first one. It set everything up for me. It's got its flaws. It may look slightly dated now, but to me, it's a perfect movie.
It really is. So, what's your New Hope in Legends besides Thrawn, besides the whole trilogy?
That's a tricky question.
Yeah. No
for
worries.
Me to,
Can't
for me
answer
to
it.
critically accept a certain era. So, for example, the Clone Wars novels and the lead-in, all the novels based around the prequels, I think are some of the best Legends, because Legends had been around for a while. They'd got some really good authors. The publishing arm had decided what the universe was. The rules were in place. So then you've got books like Darth Maul Shadowhunter, Cloak of Deception, the Medstar books, Labyrinth of Evil, even go into Revenge of the Sith novelization, but all work so well together. You know, it's peak Star Wars because the rules were defined. But then for me personally, like I mentioned, Starfighters of Adumar, gun to my head, possibly in my top 3, or Wraith Squadron, more X-Wing books, because they're just funny and fantastic.
Yeah, I'd have to say, a lot of the short stories are some of my favorites. Getting the Star Wars magazine, reading the short stories in there.
Yeah.
Do you have any of your favorite ones that you know from Legends?
It's a running joke, isn't it? But I'm a short story guy, and everyone just keeps telling me to stop talking about short stories when I want to get them on the website and stuff. But you just look at books like Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina. I love that book. There's so much going on, and how all those storylines weave throughout the main movie, like they did with From a Certain Point of View.
Yeah.
So I've always loved what happens off screen, or who is that character. The stormtrooper in A New Hope who tries to stop Luke and Obi-Wan and gets told these aren't the droids you're looking for. Reading his backstory, I love that. That's what I live for when it comes to Star Wars.
I'd have to agree with you. It's not just the stories don't just give you something fun to read, right? Because it is a little different. It's little stories here and there of different characters, but it really fills in the void of who these people are, right? You've got the Cantina, and the big thing with the Cantina is that they're still finding new characters that they never really named, or they're trying to figure out who this person was, right, in the Cantina itself. And the Cantina stories and how they describe, let's for instance just take the what was the vampire, what's his name, I forget his name.
Danik Jericho,
possibly, I think so. He's the one that's smoking hookah in the scene. All you see him is smoke hookah. It's maybe like 5 milliseconds worth of footage. But then you go into his whole backstory, and then you go into like the Ithorian, the whole backstory of Hammerhead at the time. Sorry for that derogatory term.
Momor Nadon.
Yep, Momor Nadon. And did a lot of these names created from like West End, or was it the actual authors themselves that named these characters? Where did it come from?
I think in the case of Momor Nadon, if I'm remembering right, I could be completely wrong here, but I think that was Kevin J. Anderson's story, because I know the character got used again a few times. So he may have come from something prior to that. But I think a lot of those were invented for the Tales from Mos Eisley.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I love those books. So what other tales are there for those who don't know? There's a couple of them that I know of.
Yeah, so you've got the three sort of movie ones: Tales from Mos Eisley, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, Tales from Jabba's Palace. But Legends also had Tales from the Empire and Tales from the New Republic, which just printed stories from the old Western Games Adventure Journal. But one of my favourites of theirs is Timothy Zahn and Michael Stackpole teamed up to write Side Trip, which is about Grand Admiral Thrawn disguising himself as Jodo Kast, who in turn was a Boba Fett wannabe with similar Mandalorian armor, but teaming up with Corran Horn while he still worked for Corsac on Corellia, and working with his dad, Hal Horn, who was dead by the time a Rogue Squadron book starts. But that's all Legends. That's nothing movies. That's all Legends books characters in this one short story interacting with each other, and it's really good.
Yeah, there's so many good stories in those, and I'm right there with you when it comes to the short stories, and especially they've got an omnibus of I'm totally skipping on the name right now, but the magazine with all of the short stories from there.
The Insider magazine.
The Insider magazine. There you go.
Yes, coming out next month.
Yeah, I think it's next month. So
yeah, so excited.
I know. So for those of the listeners out there who do not know what Star Wars Insider is, just give them a little rundown on that.
Star Wars Insider has been running for years, and it's like the official Star Wars magazine, and it's everything from interviews to what books are coming out, features, video games. They've just started publishing original fiction again, but they haven't for a while. But it used to be quite a big part of it. Every month there'd be a new short story in it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what we're actually including in this issue that's coming out.
I agree. What I really like about Star Wars Insider is after you would get like an announcement of a fresh book came out of, say, at Celebration, a brand new Legends book, which you don't get those anymore. But in Star Wars Insider, you would get like a pre-story, maybe a story of a character. I'm trying to think of some right now, but it's been a long time.
Well, something like the Tenebra's Way for Darth Plagueis. There's a really key moment when Darth Plagueis kills his master, and then you get this short story from inside a magazine that tells you about those moments, but from the master's point of view.
Yeah, one of these days I'd like to go into some of those short stories and whatnot, but it's if anybody's interested, go pick up like Tales of the Mos Eisley Cantina, or what is it, Jabba's Palace, Tales of Jabba's Palace, and just check them out. You can just read one part of it and it's perfect. It gives you some insight on who that character is. You can go back, watch the movies, and take a look at him. and whatnot. But unfortunately, guys, I'd love for Trevor to stay on here for at least 12 more hours. But he does have to get to sleep across the pond. It is... What time is it over there, buddy?
It is 4:10 in the morning.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's get Trevor to bed, guys. Let's get the Sandman over there, or the Sand men and the Sand women too, the children too. I was trying something there. But that's all the time we've got today. No live show next week, but after that we'll start our Jedi Academy roundtable, where Luke walks on lava, Leia is a bad mom, and Han Solo gets chased by glowing drug spiders.
And don't forget the blob races.
And the blob races. It's going to be a good time. I can't wait to get to it. Thanks for joining us for Legends Look Back. Thanks to Meg, our producer. Without her, this show would not go on. And Nathan, our video editor, for just putting on so much work into the show. Guys, we appreciate you so much. And especially thank you guys, all the Patreons out there. You can get in behind the scenes at Utini with access to lots of bonus shows, including Meg's new show, Calf Faves, Bounty Hunt, Light Speed Skipping, and Star Wars Archives, and so much more. Now that we're live on Twitch, you can help us by subscribing either... Sorry, guys. This is like the first time I've ever read this. I always just sit here and chill. There's a lot going on. Either the old-fashioned way with Prime Gaming. Also, we want your questions. Email us an audio file at legendslookback@utini.com. Leave us a voicemail at 508-686-1158. Send us messages on Twitter. You can find us at legendslookback.com. You can find our homeboy Jared at Jared Q Mays. I'm at Wake Up Freddy. Meg?
At Meg Dowell.
Trevor, where can we find you, buddy?
I'm at Davy Todd.
At Davy Todd. We're also on YouTube, Discord. Look for us. We're all out there. All of us are out there all the time. If you're looking to buy some of these books of what we talked about and want to help support the show, look up your book on YouTube, click the Amazon link on the profile, and we'll get a few cents to keep the lights on. Another way to help us out with our show, for your love of Utini, get some merch, man. Get some swag at our store at utini.com/merch. If you've read any of these books, head over to utini.com, leave a review, let us know what you think. Remember to keep to the Utini fan code, and may the Force be with you. Take care, everybody.
This is a Utini broadcast.